It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Welcome back to the program. We have a public policy analyst back with us. He's an economics expert, professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey. Dr. Michael Busler is back with us. Michael, thanks for coming on the show, sir.
Hi, Paul. How are you? It's my pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. I am, and it's always great to talk to you. And one of the reason I want to have you on today is I saw there's an article out there, an unprecedented government spending spree picks up, and it says here the federal government could spend close to half its appropriated budget in the final fiscal quarter, which ends September 30th. Why does no one talk about the national debt anymore, Dr. Busler?
Certainly the public debt is huge, and particularly in the last 10 years, it's doubled essentially in the last 10 years, and it is going to be a problem, especially now that interest rates are going up, and that's going to mean it's more expensive to carry it. So why is the debt going up, especially when Republicans control the president and both houses of Congress, and certainly the Republican Party generally addresses the issue of deficits and tries to reduce them. The thing is, it's a question now of priorities. So when President Trump got into office, there were a number of things that needed to be fixed immediately. One was we had an economy that was stuck in a slow growth position for almost 2 decades. In fact, before Trump got into office, the economy hadn't had a 3% annual growth rate since 2005, and it hadn't had a 4% growth rate since the year 2000. And that's caused all kinds of problems, economic and many of the social problems. So that needed to be fixed. Secondly, our military had been decimated. And the reason was in 2011, Congress tried to reduce government spending. And they did it by taking a look at some of the social programs we have and how much money the government is spending. Indeed, more than half of the government spending every year goes for what we call income maintenance programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other social programs. So Congress said, look, we're going to have to get some of those numbers down. Now, President Obama, whose priorities were to cure perceived social injustices and have economic growth as a secondary priority, he said, if you're going to cut spending in social programs, for every dollar you cut in social programs, you have to cut a dollar out of the military. So they passed this sequester, and that's what happened. Congress tried to control spending on social programs, but because of the sequester, they had to cut spending on the military. Well, after about 4 or 5 years of low spending, our military was in terrible shape. Large percentages of our airplanes couldn't fly. We couldn't have a conflict and try to have enough resources to come out, be successful in these conflicts. So President Trump addressed both problems. To get the economy going, he copied what Ronald Reagan did in 81, implemented in 82, and what Kennedy Johnson did in 63, 64, both actions which led to high growth in the economy. So he copied his tax cut. After that, implemented the tax cut in 2018 this year, and economic growth has started to increase. In fact, we're up to about a 4% growth rate. The third quarter number will be out the last week of October. It will probably show about a 4.5% growth rate. So he's got the economy growing. He did it through tax cuts. Now, tax cuts did not add to the deficit because the first half through the second quarter of this year, total tax revenue to the government, even at the lower tax rate, total tax revenue to the government is about 1% higher in 2018 than it was in 2017. So the tax cut did not cause an increase in the deficit. However, the deficit is way up. So what caused that was primarily President Trump said, look, we have to get our military back up to the strength where it should be. And to do that, we're going to have to spend close to $700 billion this year and next year. So he got that passed also. So most of the deficit that's incurred now and the increase in the deficit is due primarily to military spending. Also recall last year when Trump signed a budget that did increase spending in everything, the military and other social programs, his exact words were, never again will I sign a spending bill like this. So again, it's a question of priorities. He's got the economy growing. He's on his way to getting the military built up. He's got the tax code close to where he wants it, and I think they're going to work on that again shortly. The next thing President Trump will tackle after the midterm elections is reducing government spending. So the deficit is up, the spending is up. It's sort of a temporary thing, at least until we get through these next elections. President Trump will then concentrate on that, and you'll see him bring spending down, and you'll see the deficit being reduced.
We're talking with Dr. Michael Busler. He is an economics expert, professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey. Well, if what you said is true in terms of he's going to tackle spending next, that would put a lot of more. I mean, it really raises the stakes with the midterm elections coming up, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does. Now, they could have tackled the issue of the budget back in August and September. The fiscal year runs out at the end of this year. They passed the short-term spending measure because everybody, Republicans and Democrats, didn't want to go through a budget fight right before the elections. President Trump said if spending doesn't go the way it should go, he's prepared to shut down the government. Now, when the government gets shut down, really everybody loses. Everybody points fingers. Whose fault is it? Years ago, it was blamed on the Republicans, and it hurt them. The last time, they ended up blaming it on the Democrats, the Schumer shutdown, they called it. But it's too risky for either party to try to reduce government spending right before an election is about to come up because the fight is going to be very nasty. So they passed the short-term resolution. Will get us into next year. Once the elections are through, then President Trump will concentrate on reducing spending. And you're absolutely right. It's very critical for the Republicans to be able to maintain the majority in the House and the Senate. I believe, in spite of some of the polls you see and some of the rhetoric, I think when people go to the polls in November and get ready, get in that booth, and they're going to pull the lever who they're going to vote for, the most important thing to them is their economic security, and secondly is their national security. And President Trump has done very well in both of those areas. And the Republican message will be vote Republican and let's keep this thing going. I think the Republicans are going to end up maintaining the majority in the House. I think they're going to add to the majority in the Senate, probably ending up with about 57 or 58 senators, and it could be as high as 60 senators. So it's very critical what happens in this election. As if the Republicans can maintain the control, again, as I think they will, they'll have a much easier time of reducing spending next year and getting that deficit down.
Well, I hope you're right on both accounts. I hope they keep the House and the Senate, and I hope they would start to tackle spending. But like you said, in the conservative realm of ideas, if you're going to spend money, a lot of conservatives would rather you spend it on defense. Certainly, yeah. And everybody knows that President Obama, or at least believes he was a weak president when it comes to that sort of thing. Let me ask you this, Michael Busler, are you a black sheep in New Jersey? How are you from New Jersey? How is this possible?
Well, I happen to live at the New Jersey shore, and I've been a beach kind of guy for years. But you're absolutely right. It's very difficult, not only where I live, but I'm also in academia. The university where I teach was originally started 40, 50 years ago as a liberal arts college. So they still have a very strong liberal arts view of things. And at the school where I teach, probably 95% of the faculty and probably the students too tend to follow a liberal view.
Yeah.
I try to give my views where I can. I used to be a little more vocal with them, but it turns out that it ended up in a bunch of shouting matches.
Yeah.
So now I'm very selective with what I do, and then I write for national publications.
Yeah, and you certainly do write for national publications. Do you see the effectiveness of the mainstream press on some of these young people? I mean, I would venture to think that all of a sudden a lot of students are now really, really worried about Russia. You know, when in the past, like the left used to be very anti-war, now they're very pro-conflict because they want to believe that, you know, Donald Trump's a KGB agent. I know we're getting off topic here, but I'm just so curious.
Well, I'll tell you, it really irks me that the students are not given both sides of an argument. I tell my students the purpose of going to college or getting an education, but the main thing is you learn critical thinking skills so that when you run into situations and problems, you have the skills to be able to figure things out. Now, in order for the critical thinking skills to be effective, you have to gather information. And to gather information, you need both sides of an argument. I think professors are doing the students a huge disservice by not giving both sides of an argument and let them figure out what the best way to go is. And it's not just at my university, it's at universities all across the country. The students are fed this very liberal viewpoint without looking at what the other side should be. You know, I have a very simple example. When Bernie Sanders was running for president, I was teaching an ethics class, business ethics class, and 95% of the students favored Bernie Sanders. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, look, you're going to get free tuition, you're going to get free health care, you're going to get a lot of other services that we're not going to have to pay for. And I said, well, how is that? What do you mean you don't have to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? Well, the government will pay for it, they say. I said, all right, well, the government doesn't have any money. All the government has is what they take from people that earn it. So what you're saying is you want to take money away from people that have earned it and give it to people who, for whatever reason, and I'm not judging anybody, who for whatever reason haven't earned it. That reduces incentive for people to go out and earn money, especially if they know the government's going to take a big chunk of it, and that tends to slow the economy down. They sort of understand that, and then I give them this example where it hits home with them. I said, look, take 5 students in the class, and in my class you have to have at least a 70 to get credit for the course. So suppose you have 5 students take an exam, one gets a 95 and the other 4 get 65. I said, how would you feel if I took 20 points away from the high scorer and gave 5 points each to the other 4? That way the other 4 had 70 and they passed, and the person that got the good grade still has 75. He doesn't need any more than 70. And they say, well, that's not fair. I mean, the student worked hard. He earned a grade. He should keep exactly what he earned. And I say to them, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, that when people go out into and work and through their efforts they earn income, they should be able to keep the income that they earned. Look, we're all very compassionate people, and we want to help people that truly need it, but there are people that don't need it that are collecting some of this, and it's the people that are earning it that are losing out. Mm-hmm. Once I explain it that way, I see they scratch their heads a little bit, start to think about it, and that's what I'm trying to do, to get the students to use the critical thinking skills we're supposed to be teaching them, take a look at both sides of an argument, and see which one makes the most sense. Professors are doing a huge disservice, in my opinion, by not presenting both sides of an argument.
You know, we're talking with Dr. Michael Busler. He is a professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey, a featured columnist at Newsmax LifeSat, townhall.com, expert in economics. Dr. Busler, first of all, thank you. This has kind of turned in towards the end of the interview as a way to at least highlight that, hey, at liberal universities, there are some good guys that are attempting to educate kids and teach them to think for themselves. Is there anybody else kind of like you, or is there some sort of professor alliance where you are, or are you pretty much the only one?
Well, there are 330 faculty members where I teach. I found two other ones in the business school that tend to go along with me. So there are a couple more. I'm hoping there are more than just the two that I've been able to find. So I think there are some out there. Many of them are afraid to sort of speak up, especially if you're a younger professor, you don't have tenure, you're afraid to speak up about some things because you're a little worried about what it might do to your career. But I think there are more people out there, and as the economy grows and as there's more opportunity available to everyone, I think the more conservative argument will come forth, and hopefully the professors will take a look at both sides and start presenting that.
Well, yeah, when I was in college, I was a liberal, but then you start to think about things differently once you go get a job and you start working, and then you see that money taken out of your check, and so that's something I think that's very, very common. And like you said, if the economy continues to grow, there's going to be more people out there who are going to understand the idea of incentive and disincentive, and the idea of, hey, look, I was just successful, and I want to be more successful than I am today, and I need a growing economy and a capitalist free market society in order to do that.
That's exactly right. I was the same way. I was in college, and I was liberal also. The government shouldn't allow this to happen, and the government should make sure this person's taken care of, and the government has an obligation to do all these things. Then I got out in the real world, started working, and I saw everything I wanted to do, the government to do, was coming out of my paycheck. So I said, look, that really doesn't benefit anybody. I've worked hard to earn this. I should be able to keep it. And when you give somebody something for nothing, there's no incentive for them to go out and earn it themselves. If somebody is hungry, and you have a fisherman who's caught a lot of fish, well, the Democratic view would be, look, you've got a lot of fish, give some to the person that's hungry. The problem is that actually creates two problems. One, the person who gets the fish now becomes dependent on somebody for survival. And two, the person who's doing the fishing has to catch enough for himself and for somebody else. A better position would be to teach the person who's hungry how to fish so he can get his own fish. Then he takes care of himself. The other person just has to catch enough fish for himself. Everybody's happy in the longer term. So just giving somebody something for nothing is, because you want to be a humanitarian, is really not in the best interest of everybody. Giving somebody opportunity, which is what this growing economy will do, give people opportunity to take care of themselves. President Trump said when he got in, I'm going to reduce spending on food stamps. And the Democrats were up in arms, and people are going to starve to death. This is horrible. Spending, the number of people on food stamps is down by about 4 million since President Trump took office. He's spending less on food stamps, not because he's not giving it to people who need it, but because there are fewer people that need it because the economy is growing. And that's essentially how he's going to reduce the spending on social programs, get the economy growing again. And I think we may see some real high growth next year. I wouldn't be surprised to see a quarter or two next year with having growth over 5%.
Wow, that would be huge.
Once that happens, there'll be opportunity for everybody. And I bring that up, and people tell me I'm crazy, and I say, look, when Reagan cut taxes, went into effect in 1982, in 1984, the economy grew for the entire year at a 7.5% rate. So these kind of tax cuts can spur higher economic growth, and I see that coming next year. Some of the talk recently about a recession, I think, is way off base. I think we're due for a long-term high growth period in the U.S. economy to make up for the lack of good growth we've had for the last really 18 years.
Dr. Michael Busler, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on, and I hope we can do this again soon. It's always great to talk to you.
Thank you, Paul. It was my pleasure.
Yes, sir. So you can find his articles, his commentaries, folks, at Newsmax, LifeZet, and townhall.com. That's Michael Busler, Dr. Michael Busler. All right, so